guys, and welcome to my 5th episode in my summer blockbuster movie series. Today I'm going to be talking about T2 Terminator 2 Judgment Day. So, Terminator 2 is James Cameron's sequel to the first Terminator that came out in the 80s, and Terminator 2 came out in 1991, starring and returning Arnold Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton, and then, of course, we have a new face, Edward Furlong, who played a young John Connor, Sarah Connor's son. So, this film really was one of a kind. It embodied sci fi, drama, some comedy, and some elements of horror. Because the fact that robots were essentially taking over the world, and then fast forward decades later to the age of AI that we live in now, wouldn't you agree it's a little creepy that James Cameron maybe have been doing some foreshadowing? So, of course, let's recharge into some fun facts and happenings on the set. As I've mentioned in previous episodes, I always find it really fascinating to see what other actors could have had such roles in these films. And one of the greatest actors of our lifetime, Denzel Washington, was offered the role of Miles Dyson, the owner of Skynet. Now, the role eventually went on to go to Joe Morton, who I would say played the role quite well. But yes, James offered it to Denzel, and Denzel said, quote, "No offense, Jim, but when I read the script, I thought all he does is look scared and sweat a lot. So I'll pass." What do you know? So, next interesting and quite hilarious fact indeed, Arnold Schwarzenegger was quite the jokester on set. So funny, in fact, that during the iconic bar scene, a woman walked into this bar not realizing that a film production was going on, and Arnold, just wearing a pair of flesh colored Bermuda shorts because he is suggestively naked in this scene, she goes up to him, not realizing, I guess, who he is or what's going on, and Arnold says to her, "It's male stripper night," and she abruptly walks out. So to see Arnold kind of playing around and having fun is quite hilarious. To piggyback on that fact during the bar scene, during this time, James Cameron's budget was starting to see an influx, and the bar scene was almost omitted. But James said, "But no, this is in my script. I'm going to stick to it. If I go over budget, we'll just cross that bridge when we get there." And thankfully, it made it into the film because to me, this is one of the iconic moments in the film. It starts off with him kind of searching to see what fits, and people's reaction in the bar is just hilarious. So, in a way, that really helped the film have some comic relief, and I'm glad it stayed in the movie. All right, one of the most iconic, and I'd have to say by far, my favorite, other than Arnold's character in this film, had to be Linda Hamilton's character, Sarah Connor. First of all, she's badass. So, what can go wrong with a badass female kicking butt? And then, secondly, she had quite the time on set. During the hospital scene where her character, she is put into a mental institution because of all of the anguish and kind of PTSD she suffered from Arnold's character being sent there as a mission to kill her and her unborn son. But now he returns in T2, programmed to save her. Well, unbeknown to her, she does not know that. All she remembers and is grained in her brain that he is there to kill her. So when she sees him, she's freaked out. She's like, "Get away from me." And she just goes full on psycho, which I don't blame her because she went through the ringer. But that iconic hospital scene where he is there to save her and she's kicking and thrashing and trying to run, there's a scene where Arnold Schwarzenegger, his T-800 model, has a rifle and he is going to do everything in his power and shoot at hospital staff or anybody who gets in his way because he is there now to save Sarah. And during one of these scenes where they have a shootout, Linda takes out one of her earplugs and then the gun goes off, and she actually in real life went deaf in one ear due to that scene. And Arnold experienced quite some pain as well. So his character, as we know, drives a Harley Davidson, has this big rifle, and there is a prominent scene in the film where he's spinning the gun around with his arm. And in particular, when Arnold was training for that scene where he has to spin the rifle around, he did quite the job on his hands. He actually ripped skin off of a part of his hand and had to go to the doctor. And when the doctor assessed it, he was like, oh, no, no, no. In order for this hand to heal, you have to stop filming. And James Cameron was like, no, we're going to finish. So he just, as they say, no pain, no gain. And the movie had to get done. Another interesting fact, and by far one of my favorites again, has to be the role of the T-1000, played by Robert Patrick, the new and improved model who had liquid metal for hands and could re-heal himself and come back in a blink of an eye. Robert Patrick did a lot of rigorous preparation for the role of the T-1000 robot model. He did an intense running regimen where he trained to only breathe through his nose so it looked like he wasn't tiring out during those intense running scenes. So the running scenes that we see of him in the film, that is really him running at a top speed, which is just incredible. He also trained how to shoot a pistol without blinking, just like a machine might. And very, very interesting fact, he studied the movements of great white sharks and how they kind of creep and pounce on their prey, as well as learning the head turn movements of bald eagles. Edward Furlong's character, John Connor, had grown quite a bit over these X amount of months, and he was going through puberty. So a lot of the earlier scenes, his voice is still in that kind of boyish, light state. But as they continued filming, his voice starts to get lower and he begins to get taller and his voice starts to crack. So during some of those scenes where he's going through puberty and his voice is breaking, they actually had to reshoot a lot of those scenes and dub his speaking so that it could fit with the smoothness of production. And then because he was getting taller, there was a lot of scenes where they were going to have some continuity issues. And because in the earlier scenes, he's obviously shorter than Linda Hamilton, he was growing at such a fast rate, he started to become taller than Linda, so they had to make a makeshift hole on different parts of the set so that he could step into it and still be at that shorter register when he had scenes with his mother, Sarah Connor. Now, while this film did incorporate some CGI, one of the most impressive scenes was the explosion scene. Now, in that scene, as we can see, Sarah Connor is dreaming of the apocalyptic world essentially just being obliterated and Skynet taking over and the Earth exploding. Like, how does a director and people on set make something look so realistic, and how do they essentially blow up a set without really ruining a bunch of things and hurting anyone? So James Cameron did quite the research on how to implement this, and he studied different things in history where there were explosions like the Hiroshima bomb. He actually went to several scientists who either studied that part of history or were a part of that history, and they said they saw a pre-cut of the explosion, and they said that that was probably one of the most accurate explosions, that if something like that were to happen to Earth, 100% what that would look like. So James Cameron really, really did his research, and it showed. It's such an incredible scene. Thank you so much for watching this episode and installment of my summer blockbuster movie series. Again, hope you guys enjoyed, and stay tuned next week for episode 6. Then.